I've always wondered if a flight simulator can teach you how to fly a real plane. So I did some research and discovered a place near me called the CFI Flight Academy that agreed to let me learn not only just to fly a real plane, but also to learn a crazy trick that you'll see later. They have this really big realistic simulator that I'd be training on, and in order to learn the trick, there were 4 basic skills that I need to learn. But first, let me explain why I wanted to do this in the first place. This man right here is George Chapman, who was a lawyer with his own law firm, marathon runner in the Manitoba Runners Association Hall of Fame, race car driver in the Canadian Motorsports Hall of Fame, pilot serving 4 years in the Winnipeg Air Force, and also my grandpa. So in order to impress him, I needed to start learning these skills. So this is Devin, who taught me each of the 4 skills. First, I needed to get familiar with the plane and figure out what every button and switch did. Next, I learned about something called attitudes, which is essentially the position that the plane flies in. Third, I needed to learn how to make the plane climb and descend. And finally, I needed to learn about making the plane turn, which was not as straightforward as I would have thought. Eventually, I learned all the 4 basic skills, but before I could try the trick, I wanted to check out the actual plane that I'd be flying in. Devin took me over to the hangar where the plane was kept, and upon looking inside, some of the controls were different from the simulator, which made me start to worry. However, the plane looked awesome and I was super excited to try it. After, I made the 2-hour drive home, then spent the rest of my day as normal. I hit the gym, studied a bit of chess because I need to keep practicing. Then I went over everything that I learned today so that tomorrow I could impress Devin and learn the trick. On day 2, I was ready to learn what's called a spin, where as the plane is flying, you slowly start to angle it upwards until it stalls. It will then fall directly towards the ground, nose down while spinning. This is literally the trick I'm going to be learning to do on my own in a couple of days. Devin walked me through each step, bringing down the throttle to make the plane slow down.
Yeah, raise the pitch, reduce your speed.
While pulling back on the steering wheel until you hear a loud warning sound. Then using the foot pedal and bringing the engine down to idle and watching the plane spin towards the ground before easing out of it. We worked on this for a few hours while still practicing the skills from the day before. I found it hard to memorize all the steps right away, but I was determined to master it by tomorrow.
So if there's anything that you do when you go home, today you need to memorize all the steps for the spin.
Eventually, I headed home from the CFI Flight Academy and spent the rest of the day as usual. On day 3, I wanted to show Devin I had everything memorized from the day before. My goal was to pull this spin off flawlessly. Now before I can actually try it in a real plane, I had to practice a lot more. But this time, I would be spending time in virtual reality to see what it was like, and immediately it became 10 times harder.
Whoa, that's so cool!
Taking off wasn't too hard. However, in the air, doing the trick became a huge challenge. Pretty much every time I would try and level out after spiraling downwards, I would just crash into the ground. I had no idea what I was doing wrong. On day 4, I wanted to practice on the simulator even more. Tomorrow, Devin would be taking me up on a test flight to show me what it would feel like in a real plane. However, I wouldn't be flying it yet. So I spent the rest of the day practicing, still crashing sometimes, but improving nonetheless. On day 5, it was time for me to actually ride in the plane and experience what it would feel like as a passenger. Soon enough, it came time to do the spin. The nose of the plane went up, then we started falling as it tipped back towards the ground. We were spiraling downwards. It was such a crazy feeling, and as we leveled out of it, it felt like gravity had become twice as strong.
That is so cool!
Eventually, we landed, and I was excited because tomorrow was time for my first flight.
How was it?
That was crazy.
Can't wait to actually fly that myself.
On the morning of the flight, I was super nervous. Although Devin would be right there next to me in case anything were to go wrong, I wanted to be the one fully in control where he wouldn't need to take over. Especially during the trick, I wanted to do everything by myself.
Fuel selector valve, radios, electrical equipment, flight controls, throttle, a little bit, ignition switch, start.
I started up the engine, then taxied over to the runway where I prepared to take off. Flying a real plane felt different than the simulator, but I knew I could do it. I throttled all the way up, then controlled the plane until the speedometer hit 60. I pulled back on the steering wheel, and suddenly, I was off the ground. I was a little shaky, and I had the plane take off a bit to the left, but I was excited that I was flying it by myself. We got higher and higher, gaining enough altitude so I could pull off the trick by myself. Once we hit 5,000 feet, I leveled off and got ready. It was now time to attempt the spin.
Reduce the throttle. Increase the pitch. Pull back on the steering wheel. Back. Full left rudder. Power down to idle.
My heart was pounding, but I did it, and it felt unbelievable. And Grandpa George, if you're watching this, I hope you're impressed.
You know where Jordan's missing necklace is.